welcome back to Man Sewing. We have turned the studio into an absolute construction zone today. My name's Rob and I'm going to guide you through one of my works in progress. I know usually you want to see a finished project, but I'm super excited and I couldn't wait to share with you. I've been dreaming about this quilt for a long time and I am pumped. So what you see on the design wall behind me is my variegated cloth cityscape, and it's in the construction phase and you're going to be so excited you're not going to be able to wait till we get finished either. So I want to teach you how to build your buildings. Let's get started. I want to tell you what you're going to need. Now, I kind of got to admit, I'm a little starstruck right now. I am using Carol Breyer-Fallert's Essentials fabric by Benartex, and it's always awesome to find a cool variegated fabric, but I'm a big Carol Breyer-Fallert fan anyway. So hi Carol, if you ever see this, please say hi. Anyways, now the reason I dug this fabric so much though is it variegates and it basically switches right at the halfway point. So see if I can hold this up another way as well so you can see it. All of the shades and all of the colors in here are very important to the layout of the quilt. I started with 2 yards of each cut because you just can't get enough variegated fabric, right? But at the end of the day, I will tell you, I will use all 2 yards of my gray. Of the blue, which is just the background, basically I've got about a 45-inch layout across and it's just over 22. I left the fold here so you can see the 22 mark. So I'm going to call this about a 24. So that's the background, and I have my light blue at the bottom, the darkest blue at the top there. And then of the yellow, I will barely use a half yard of the 2 yards I purchased because this is just for the little windows. But it's like I said, always good to have in my stash. The only other supplies you're going to need for this project is your cutting tools like your ruler, your rotary cutter, and in a little bit I'm going to teach you how to use an official piece of cardstock. Other than that, it's really, really simple. You're going to want to do some nice accurate piecing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to show you how to do this actually as strip set rows. So put your hard hat on, get your dusty boots on, and let's get started on these buildings. Now, in preparing for you, what I wanted to do is start cutting my fabrics, but I needed just a little bit. Every inch of this fabric is really important. So let me fold this back real quick. It's this black color right here that I needed some of to get the prep work done for us. So I'll be coming back for that, but that's what was right here. But the nice thing about that for me, that's where my first cut's going to be. So follow along. We're going to build one of these smaller buildings for the background. The functionality of the construction works the same for every building. What changes is the size of the windows and the amount of windows you add in. So as I'm doing this, I'm going to cut, but I'm also going to keep all of this in order. So my first cut is actually for a building, sorry, let me tell you, we're starting on the face of the building, okay? So the first cut is for one of the sides. It's going to be like this piece here, and that's a 1.5 inch cut. And do keep these in order because the gray variegates this way for me. So I'm going to set that there. And then I am going to basically cut 2 more gray strips at 1 inch. So the first cut was 1.5. The next 2 cuts are 1 inch. And the last cut, no matter how many windows across you go, your last cut is 1.5 inches again. Now, for ease of use, basically, I'm going to set this gray aside. I'm going to come back to it over and over again, so I'm going to keep it close. Then I'm going to take my 1.5 inch pieces and I'm going to set them aside kind of in the order in which they came off the fabric. The only other thing you're going to need to start these strip set rows of your windows are some 1 inch strips of the yellow variegated. Now, like all of these, basically what I did is I cut a 1 inch strip, but then I cut the fold line out as well. So once the fold was out, this is one 45-inch strip, but I'm going to use it twice, or as 2 pieces. So I'm going to be able to lay this out and stitch it there. I'm going to stitch it there, and of course I had another piece. So when this is all done, it's going to sew together just like that. And once I add in the cross members, that's when the 1.5 inches come back on yet. But we're not ready for those yet. So once again, set them aside. And what those strip sets do is that makes that whole section through there. So the fun thing to be thinking about while you're doing your construction is watching your color management, or the variegation of color. So in this, of course, I want the lightest color of my white or yellow up at the top, darkest on the bottom. And on the sides of the building, I'm going to do the same, but a lot of times I let that darker yellow be kind of over hidden behind the building that'll be sitting in front of it. So for me, that was the fun part of is managing the colors as I went through. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch these together for you. Well, as a matter of fact, I had the construction crew running all night long last night. They've already stitched them together for us. So I've got them all done already here. So that is without those 1.5 inches on the side. Remember, those go in a few minutes. So let me just reorganize this. Nothing goes in the to-be dog bed pile yet, meaning the scrap pile. Every little bit of this could become important. So just hang on to it as you're working through. And your first cut is going to go ahead and true up that top edge, like yay. And then I'm just going to swing that around 180 degrees. And get ready, and I'm going to cut 1-inch strips of this. The majority of the windows I use in the background basically become 1-inch by 1-inch cuts, and they finish at 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch windows. If you'll get a notepad and paper and pencil handy, I will tell you some of the other math I used towards the end of the video here. But let me focus on this. I don't want to cut my fingers off. So basically what happens is I cut through this until it's all the way done, and I'm also keeping this in order because I want that variegated yellow to work for me. So I'll just quickly finish this off. Now, once those cuts are made, I'm definitely leaving them in order. I'm just going to slide them down near my sewing machine. And I went over to my scrap pile and I found myself a chunk, let's say, that looked about like this. Now, what happens is these pieces here are going to measure at about 3.5 inches across. So I want roughly a 4-inch strip from my scrap pile. And once I've got that 4-inch strip, I'm going to go in and cut all of these little pieces. What I'm looking for, though, this is, I found pretty important, is I want these grays to kind of match these grays that I'm going to be sewing them between. So just be careful that you're not using too many different shades of gray, because this is all supposed to look like that same window frame or that window box. So anyways, these were all cut in the same order. So leaving that little bit of that selvage on, you can probably see those little bumps. They are going to be on the scrap end of the window sets, but they help me know which side is which. So I'm keeping everything in order. Run through there, and now I'm going to wander over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to simply grab a piece, and I start with a gray on the bottom, and I actually end with a gray on the top. So you're going to have one more gray strip than you do the yellow for the windows there. I'm going to pinch this together, and just to point it out, there's that selvage you can see, so that's off to the scrap end of this. If you have a single hole stitch plate for your machine, this is a great time to use it because you're dealing with those little tiny corners. And sometimes those little corners get sucked into the hole where the needle goes through down to the bobbin area, right? And then I'm just going to go through, so gray to yellow, gray, and watching and managing the order, making sure I keep that selvage on the scrap side. Okay, so let's keep putting a few more of these on. So I'm always starting at the same end, right? And I'm just taking piece by piece. Get that right back underneath there. Okay, and then I take a gray. There's another trick I've seen folks do with this. I'll show you here in just a second. Let me get this stitched down for you. A lot of times at first when you first start sewing, you're not sure which is which. Now for these grays it didn't matter because each gray piece is the same color side to side. I don't know how to say it differently. But let's say, for example, like with the yellow, you can see that they're getting darker. If you didn't know what your bottom piece was, you could easily just take one of your straight pins and you would just put a straight pin carefully through and you would know that was now your bottom piece, right? So that always is your marker. So you just keep adding on as you go, adding on as you go. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and sew all of these together for you. Why don't you head to the construction or the hardware store and Get yourself some safety goggles and maybe a hard hat and that kind of stuff. Well, good morning. I hope you slept well through all of that. I certainly enjoyed the stitching. I've got it all stitched together for you here. And before I tidy it up, I just want to point out, I like to have my bright yellow or my whiter yellow at the top and my dark yellow down there at the bottom. So at this point, I'm really just going to lay this down. And I'm going to set my ruler on the side. And I am actually looking in my ruler right here at these crosshairs, making sure that I try to keep my first cut as perpendicular to all the work as possible. I'm going to trim that all off clean. And then I'm going to spin this 180 degrees like that. And I'm going to do the same on this side. Now, keeping in mind, I'm not actually piecing all of these buildings together. Each building is its own unique shape and size, and therefore the math is not all that important. Meaning they don't all have to be the same, they don't all have to be cut at a certain thing, you just want them to stay somewhat perpendicular or parallel. Now, the next key is slow down and take a moment and look at your colors and go, that's right, I have my lighter gray on that side, my darker gray on that side. And if I look really close by my management, because I just kept adding on pieces, it looks like my building face has gotten a little bit taller. So I always start my sewing at the top of the building. Remember, the buildings hide behind each other. So if you ever need to cheat a little bit, cheat to the bottom or to the back of the angled wall or the side wall. So now that I'm over here at the machine again, I'm just making sure that I've got a nice seam allowance set up for my 1/4 inch. And I'm going to sew on these sides. And sew on this other side for us here. Okay, now what I am going to do at this point is I'm going to take a moment and press these open because I have one more big top header plate to put in. And I do that at the very end because now I have possibly extended out the wall, so those little scraps that were my cross beams, they don't quite work the same here. So I just go ahead and get myself a new piece. And if you look at this building right here, this is one of my favorites in the construction so far. I've actually used a different shade here. It's kind of the same as this side. And I like that because it kind of makes these look like they're kind of set into the building posts a little bit. So all you would do is take a quick measure here. I'm right about 5 inches. So then maybe I'll come to this scrap piece I've got here. My top header is also a 1.5 inch strip. So I'm just going to go over there to 1.5 inches. Make that slice. And then I'm going to take another second to make sure that I've got it just the way I want color-wise. Start sewing on the side that I like the color the best. Put that on and the building face will be complete. It's going to need the iron one more time. And it will need another little trimming. Nothing any quilter isn't used to, right? Especially when you're doing these kind of design as you go quilts. It's really fun, but you do a little bit more step-by-step kind of work there. Okay, so just like that, I do have my building front finished. I did run a little bit short down at the bottom there, but that's okay. That's going to hide in behind another building. Actually, might make it easier to hide it behind another building, right? Because that gives me something to dip in behind. So now that we've got that done, let's get ready to do the sides. Hey, it's phase 2 of our construction project here, and we're going to go ahead and tackle the sides of the buildings. The sides that have a little darker shading on them, and they have the angle of the windows. Now, when I say tackle, it's a huge overstatement. Do not panic. It's really easy, but we are going to set an angled cut, and we're just going to stick with that one angle throughout the entire quilt. At least that's what I did. To get my inspiration, I went to the internet, and I just put in line drawings with perspective. This was one of my favorites. It happens to be a 2-point perspective drawing, but it gave me a good idea of how the angle basically starts high and runs lower, or the building gets skinnier as it goes to the back. So when I was playing with my angle management, I literally had a piece of cardstock. I had my building's face, and I had my ruler out, and I just kept playing with the ruler angle or line. I thought it was going to be about a 60 degree, but it was not. And I just kept playing with it until I kind of liked the line. And then at that point, I had my cardstock in there. So basically it was sitting there like this, right? And so at one point I found an angle that I really liked, and I just cut my cardstock. So now whenever I'm trimming my fabric, I use the cardstock under my ruler for the first cut to make sure my angle's right throughout the rest of the quilt. I know it sounds a little too zen-like for most of you, and I don't have a physical number to offer, but literally look at it until it feels right. Now here's something funny though. We got a pretty slick crew around here, and they were pointing out that the angle of my cardstock was almost the identical angle of the line drawing. So that's a great way to do it. If you're feeling uncomfortable with my lack of instructions, just lay out your paper there and cut your line and follow that. That'll work nice too. So here is a little bit of a sample of what you're going to be working with here. This is a leftover piece from this window set back here. I am still managing the shading of my grays, and I'm still looking at where the lighting is coming in the yellows. Those are two major players in this portion of the building as well. And earlier when I was building all of these rows for these windows and I trimmed this off, I forgot to tell you how important these last little pieces would be. So these were the leftover 22 by 1 inch strips. So all of our strips are going to still be 1 inches for the windows and 1.5 inches on the sides. But this is just the leftover of that yellow, but it has that wonderful darker yellow in it. So I really want that for my windows. So before we go any further, let's just trim that off. So I have those in my possession. And I'm going to set these aside because I want to show you how I got the black fabric too, or the really dark fabric. Now, I'm going to ask you to just think this through. Remember, we have a lot of parts of this fabric we really love. The bright, light gray is going to be really crucial for the fronts of our buildings. And earlier I think I mentioned that this dark black, dark slate gray here, this is going to be important for the sides of our buildings. So I'm going to need one set of cuts that are going to be long strips that are going to be the vertical pieces that go between the windows. And the other side, I've already cut off and prepped the next step you're going to see in a second to make my horizontal lines. So I'm using a smaller piece right now, so just so you know that I'm not trying to trick you at home, but I'm going to show you how to cut those angles with this smaller piece that I'll build another small building out of later, because I need to save those big long strips. Okay, so now next thing I want to do is I want to take and lay my cardstock template right on the top corner, and I'm looking at this outer edge here to make sure it stays nice and lined up. Of course, then I move it, but that's okay. Then I just drop my ruler on top of that, and I cut. Okay, that cut right there has done all the rest of the work for us. From this point on, I'm going to simply rotate this through, and now I am making 1 inch strips. It's really easy from this point. So just making my strips, and if the variegation is obvious, you want to keep these in order as well so that your color doesn't get out of whack. So I just cut through these. At the bottom, it's going to form another kind of a squared out bottom shape. Please save that as well. You're going to want to put that on your very last row. So we're just going to cut through here. Now, this is that last piece I wanted you to also save. This top piece here doesn't have much use for us, but I don't throw anything out until I'm totally done. So these pieces are all going to lay in here like this. And then I'll take my yellow pieces and I'm going to lay them in here as well. So there's just going to be a yellow between each strip. And I know you're paying attention. So you're thinking to yourself, wait a second. He went up and down on the strip sets for the front, and he's now going side to side on the strip sets for the sides of the building. And that is very intentional because I tried it the other way, and then I had to piece together all of these pieces that had all the flexibility of the seams in there. So it was much harder to manage. So if you put all of this together, then we'll cut it. You're going to be finding it's much more efficient to sew. And I've already stitched one of them together so you can really see what's happening here. So technically, that is what you're looking at right there, okay? So with that, the other thing I want to point out as we come to the design wall, once I finish this, I'm going to lay it so that these darker orange sides are at the bottom. So you can see I was running a little light, so I got my lighter at the top here. And also it runs a little further in, so it looks more like the shadowing along the sides of the buildings, right? So I've already tidied up this end so that all I have to do from this point on is I'm going to rotate it. Even though it's an angled cut, this is still a perpendicular line. It's really, really simple, right? So these are going to be only cut at 1 inch. There's no 1.5s needed here. So I'm going to do 1 inch. So that took care of all the angles I needed, just like that. 1 inch. And it seems that I've been using a lot of these 3-row and 4-row buildings. You'll see if you look real close behind me while I'm getting my ruler ready here. Some of the buildings have more windows in the back side or the sides than they do on the front. Some of them have less. Do what you like. It's really supposed to be fun and creative for you, okay? That's what I want you to enjoy. So now that you've got these sets made here, now I'm just going to go ahead and slide in those black strips. So let's go ahead and get them for us. 1, 2, 3. I'm keeping them in order. That was the one thing I really want to stress, is just keep these in order so that your color is working for you. That's why you're doing this with just 3 fabrics, right? So I'm going to cut that here, and I only need a 1.5 inch strip. And then a 1. And a 1. And another 1.5. And let's double check to make sure I did that right. Because I want that back there. I'm going to drop this in. Then I'm going to go ahead and slide this over, drop that in, slide that over, drop that in, and I did do it correctly. Another thing I really want to point out though, if you notice, the lighter gray is closer to the brighter yellow, and the darker gray is closer to the orange color. And that's going to also look like the shading of the building. Once that's constructed, I'm going to go ahead and start to sew on the seam allowance. Again, I'm stitching from the top because the bottom of the buildings drop in behind the buildings we already have in position. Go ahead and do my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And let's just go ahead and put all of these together for ourselves. Oh, there's something else I'd like to point out too. Remember, the wall of the building has got this angle working for us. So the next one down is going to drop a little bit. So make sure that you're starting right at the top. And we still will be putting in a top plate as well. Okay, now that that's all stitched together for us, I'm going to take the iron to it real quick so that I can trim it all back down. The other thing I kind of found about a lot of this stuff is as I was working with it, the iron and the thickness of the seam allowance has kind of helped everything come back together. Now, at certain times I've been able to follow the line of my angle for my window, and at other times I just go ahead and lay that template I've created right back on there to trim that. And now I'm going to do a quick measure. I'm running at about, be a lot easier if I use the real math, 5 inches. So I want one more piece from my dark scraps if I've got to make a little bit of a piece here. I'm going to get myself a top plate going. And one of the things I like to do for that top plate is I just cut this, so I've got this neat little bit of the shadow still there. That's a 1.5 inch cut for the tops and the sides as a reminder. So I'm going to go this way, and then I'm going to sew that bad boy right along the top. And look at that, I let it overlap a ton, right? So that I don't have to worry about my angles. After a few buildings, it all becomes second nature as well. The first one, I almost pieced all the little windows in individually. I thought I was strip piecing, but it wasn't quite happening that way. So now I've learned how to make it much more efficient. Okay, I'm going to trim this off, and we're going to be ready to sew on the face to the side. And it looks like I got a little waffle there, so I'm going to take care of that with the rotary ruler. And now this piece and this piece are going to be joined together just like that to form the building. Allow me to demonstrate. Double check my angle. And I have found by having a little bit of a tip, let me put that right under the camera for you, a little bit of a tip, almost a 1/4 inch showing, seems to help those angles line up really nice, especially when you're doing the side window strip panels. Okay, this building is all but done. I am not going to worry about trimming the bottom of either the face or the side of the building. I'm going to let those things run long. Well, that's not exactly true. I can only use so much of that, right? So I guess I can trim off a little bit here and a little bit more there. But the more of it I can hide behind the other buildings, the better. And then what we're going to do is we can take this and we can set it in behind here maybe. So this would be something like this, pin it there, pray it stays because I only had one pin handy, and we just keep building our skyline all the way across. Okay, now earlier I promised you I would give you a little bit more notes on what I've done here. So get your notebook and your pencil handy. I'll wait. Okay, that's long enough. Now, with that, let's talk about this. These building windows here were basically 2 inches by 1 inch. Those were the, 2 inches by 1.5 were the cuts on those. These were the 2 inches by 1 inch cuts. Here's another fun thing I was trying right in here, where I actually was trying to angle the windows on the corner of the building. I've seen a lot of neat buildings like that. Another little bit of math that I played with in here, there is a 3/4 inch strip that was used between those, but I still used a 1 inch strip on the front, so just to change the perspective a little bit. I'm playing with adding in a couple more shadowing pieces on the real highlight or the front buildings. But for the most part, these were all 1 inch windows, 1 inch windows, 1 inch windows. That kind of keeps the whole background with that same flavor. And the front is where I'm changing the angles and the perspective. So when I see you again at Man Sewing, we're going to finish these buildings off. We're going to face them, and I'm going to use like a fusible fleece so that I can actually stick them down where I want, but they'll have some extra dimension. I'm going to quilt the background, and we'll be able to float those buildings right in on top. So I'm going to show you all of that. And also, as we're doing this design as you go kind of concept at Man Sewing, please let us know what you think. And if I've left anything out, if you have questions, please just drop those in the comments section. Of course, we'll get right to you. I'd love to answer those for you. Remember, keep your hard hat on, keep those safety goggles and your gloves on. measure twice, cut once at Man Sewing.